more nuisance. If you're gonna have a snowstorm, might as well have a foot at a time. It costs almost as much to take care of 2 inches as it does 2 feet.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid coming up to New Hampshire and the snow was like this high in the pathway going to my grandparents' house.
Remember, you started the broadcast now, so now we're being recorded.
2 minutes, Mike.
Barbara's gonna start us off.
Yep.
Everybody realizes human is no longer a part of this. But we can't easily take the name change off because I don't know if you'll have to pay for it, mostly because other things are on site. Old landfills and some ash landfills that are found covered and closed, but the problem is it's also a liability. So
Yep.
when they left, they also signed to stick with their, they chose to stick with the liability. So if something fails, they're part of the solution.
It would take us another 10 years to do affirmative.
Right?
It would take us another 10 years to do affirmative if you change the name.
Probably.
It shows 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Ready? Good evening. Welcome to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services public hearing to receive testimony regarding the draft Title V operating permit for the Hebron-Bridgewater Refuse District. We are using the GoToWebinar platform to conduct this online hearing. My name is Barbara Dorschmidt, and I work for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I will be your host for this online hearing. You will hear from me periodically throughout the hearing as I provide instructions on how you can participate, such as how to ask clarifying questions or provide oral testimony. We will turn on and describe certain webinar functions during the times of the hearing when we are soliciting questions or testimony. Please note that all attendees are muted and have no video feed. You will be able to see and hear DES staff, but neither we nor any other attendees can hear or see you through this online platform. The exception to this will be at times during the hearing where individual attendees are unmuted to ask clarifying questions or provide oral testimony. When attendees request to speak, we will call you one at a time and unmute you so that we and all other attendees can hear you. Please note that even when you are unmuted and speaking with us, your video feed will not be transmitted to us or any other attendees. We and all attendees will be able to hear you, but not see you. I will provide more detailed instructions on how to request to speak at the points during the hearing when we open the floor to you to ask clarifying questions or provide oral testimony. In addition to the instructions I will provide throughout the hearing, we also have Meg King of DES standing by to help if you need personal assistance. I'll read her phone number and email address now, and we also post it on the screen intermittently throughout the hearing. You can reach Meg by phone at 603-271-6893 or by email at margaret.king@des.nhdes.gov. That was a summary of how you will be able to participate in this hearing. Don't worry if you didn't catch it all. You will be hearing from me again later when I provide more detailed instructions. I thank you for joining us and look forward to helping you participate in this online hearing. I am now going to turn you over to our hearing officer, Mike Fitzgerald, who will get us started. Mike?
Good evening. Thank you, Barbara. For the record, it is shortly after 6 p.m. on December 8th, 2021, and we are at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services office at 29 Hazen Drive in Concord, New Hampshire, for a public hearing on the draft Title V operating permit for Hebron-Bridgewater Regional Refuse District's Municipal Solid Waste Incinerator in Bridgewater, New Hampshire. My name is Michael Fitzgerald. I serve as the Assistant Director of the Air Resources Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and I have been appointed by Craig Wright, Director of the Air Resources Division, to serve as the hearing officer for today's hearing. Also representing DES today are Gary Milbury, Air Resources Division Permitting and Environmental Health Bureau Administrator, Todd Moore, Air Permit Programs Manager, Barbara Dorfschmidt, Operating Permits Program Manager, Sheila Rydell, NSR Program Manager, Karen Craver, Environmental Health Manager of the Environmental Health Program, Meg King, Senior State Air Permit Engineer, Ash Busted, Air Permitting Program Specialist, and Shelley Marshall, Administrative Supervisor. We're also providing public access to this hearing by telephone, with additional access by GoToWebinar for this hearing. All participating DES staff are present or have the ability to communicate during this meeting through this platform, and the public is welcome to attend in person or has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in the meeting. The meeting link is posted on the DES website, which is that up on the screen. Okay. I will read the address, but it's lengthy, so https://www.des.NH.gov/Hebron-Regional-refuse-district-title-V-permit. Again, that's https://des.NH.gov events public hearing Hebron-Bridgewater Regional Refuse District Title V permit. If you are not present, you'll need to join the webinar from a computer or an iOS, Android, or Windows Phone mobile device in order to ask questions or provide oral testimony. While the GoToWebinar platform that DES will be using for this hearing provides capability for attendees to listen in by calling a phone number provided in the registration confirmation, those who join that way will only be able to listen. Phone audio only attendees will not be able to ask questions or provide oral testimony. If anyone experiences a problem with access, as Barbara mentioned, please call Meg King at 603-271-6893 or email her at Margaret, margaret.king@des.nh.gov. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the New Hampshire Code of Administrative Rules, Env-A 200 and Env-C 200. As required by these rules, the proceedings of these hearings are being recorded, and all who speak will be required to state for the record their name and the name of the party they represent, if any, at this hearing. This hearing is being recorded on GoToWebinar and will be posted later this week on the DES website. The purpose of this hearing is to provide information on the draft Title V operating permit and to receive public comment. Notice of this hearing was published on November 4th, 2021 in both the Union Leader and the Salmon Press. The notice indicated that DES would accept comments on the draft permit until next Thursday, December 15th, 2021. The process for this hearing will be as follows. First, Sheila Rydell will provide a brief presentation on the draft Title V operating permit. If you're participating via GoToWebinar, slides will accompany Ms. Rydell's presentation. Once Ms. Rydell has finished, we'll see if anyone has clarifying questions on the draft permit. We'll then proceed to the public testimony portion of the hearing. First, we'll request that any interested persons in attendance to provide testimony. We'll request any interested persons in attendance to provide testimony. After their testimony is heard, Barbara Dorschmidt will provide a brief overview on how to provide oral testimony via GoToWebinar. We'll then start to call on those wishing to testify, as well as the person on deck. Each person will have a 5-minute maximum to speak. After 5 minutes, we'll give you a friendly reminder. Questions will be addressed by DES to the extent possible. Clarifying questions will be addressed by DES to the extent possible during the public hearing. However, the purpose of this hearing is to solicit and receive comment from you. DES will address comments in our final decision. Once everyone who cares to testify has done so, I will then close the public hearing. If there are any questions about how we're going to proceed, Barbara can briefly go over how to do so. Otherwise, we'll proceed with Ms. Rydell's presentation. Does anyone have any questions on the procedure?
If anybody that's attending through the online GoToWebinar has any questions, please type your name into the question function. And I will call on you. I'm not seeing any.
All right, not hearing any questions, then we'll begin with our presentation from Sheila Rydell.
Good evening. My name is Sheila Rydell, and I am a permitting engineer with the Department of Environmental Services Air Resources Division. I am here this evening to give a presentation about a draft Title V operating permit for Hebron-Bridgewater Regional Refuse District. My presentation will include the following points: a facility description, the current permit status, the emission limits and an emission evaluation, stack test results, compliance actions, additional requirements, and conclusions and next steps. Hebron-Bridgewater operates a municipal solid waste incinerator that has a capacity of 750 pounds per hour of solid waste, which is equivalent to 9 tons per day. The incinerator has 5 propane burners, and the emissions are controlled by a wet fume scrubber. The incinerator operated 24 calendar days in 2020. The incineration unit is subject to the requirements pursuant to 40 CFR 60 subpart 4F, which is a federal regulation that was adopted in accordance with Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. Our state rule Env-A 609.01A2 requires that the facility obtain a Title V permit. The facility is currently operating under Title V operating permit TV-0060, which was issued on September 22nd, 2020. This permit expired on September 30th, 2015. A timely renewal application was received on December 19th, 2014, and DES deemed the application complete on February 9th, 2015. Because the facility submitted a timely and complete renewal application, it is operating under application shield provisions which means the failure to have a current Title V permit is not a violation under our state air rules. In addition, by submitting a timely and complete renewal application, operations may continue under the terms and conditions of the expired Title V permit until the department takes final action on the renewal application. DES has completed its technical and engineering review. This included an air regulatory applicability review to determine which air regulations apply to this facility. We then prepared a draft Title V permit, and on August 2nd, 2021, we published the notice of the Title V permit review period. We did receive a timely request to conduct the hearing, and on November 4th, 2021, we published a notice that we would be holding a hearing this evening, December 8th, to receive testimony regarding the draft Title V permit. Env-A 4300 is our state regulation that applies to solid waste incinerators. It establishes operating and emission limits for small solid waste incinerators, and small incinerators are defined as combusting less than 35 tons of municipal solid waste per day. Env-A 4300 incorporates the standard contained in 40 CFR subpart 4F. And these Env-A 4300, the requirements under this rule are included in the draft permit. Our emissions evaluation looked at emissions of regulated toxic air pollutants, or RTAPs, and it also evaluated emissions of criteria pollutants, including particulate matter, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur dioxide. This table summarizes the emission limitations that are contained in Env-A 4300. These are the pollutants that are regulated under this rule, and they fall into two categories, both criteria pollutants and regulated toxic air pollutants. And these emission limitations are included in the draft Title V permit. Env-A 1400 is our state rule that applies to emissions of regulated toxic air pollutants. The main focus of this rule is to ensure that facilities comply with ambient air limits at their property line and beyond. The ambient air limits are allowable concentrations that are established for short-term and long-term continual exposures. They are intended to protect the health of sensitive populations, including children and the elderly. Our emissions evaluation for regulated toxic air pollutants was based on the emission limitations in Env-A 4300, and also in certain cases on actual test data. We calculated adjusted in-stack concentrations for some pollutants, and for other pollutants, we performed air quality dispersion modeling. Compliance with New Hampshire's ambient air limits was demonstrated for all the regulated toxic air pollutants that were evaluated. Our emissions evaluation for criteria pollutants determined that the facility-wide allowable emissions are below the modeling thresholds, and no further evaluation was required. This slide summarizes our review of the regulated toxic air pollutants that were evaluated. There were 5 regulated toxic air pollutants that were evaluated. And In each case, the 24-hour impact or the adjusted in-stack concentration was less than the 24-hour AAL. And similarly, the annual impact or the adjusted in-stack concentration was also less than the annual AAL. So for each RTAP that was evaluated, compliance was demonstrated. This slide summarizes our review for criteria pollutant emissions. We determined the potential emissions for the facility, and as I mentioned earlier, the potential emissions are less than the modeling thresholds. I'd also like to point out that the potential emissions are less than the major source thresholds, and this facility is a true minor source of emissions. They are required to obtain a Title V permit under subpart 4F, but not because they're a major source. The facility is required to conduct annual testing, annual stack testing. If 3 consecutive tests show compliance, then the testing may be reduced to every 3 years. This table summarizes the pollutants that are required to be tested, and the emission limits are listed here also. Going back to September of 2015, the facility was on every 3-year testing schedule, and at that time they demonstrated compliance for each pollutant. They were then required to test again in 3 years, and in September of 2018 they performed stack testing again, and they demonstrated compliance for all the pollutants except for particulate matter, and I'll get into more detail on that in the next slide. As I mentioned, the particulate matter results exceeded the emission limitation in September of 2018, and the facility reverted back to annual testing for particulate matter. All other parameters were due to be tested again in September of 2021. So after the September 2018 test, they retested in May of 2019, and they did not meet the PM emission limitation at that time. They implemented some additional maintenance procedures for their scrubber and retested in September of 2019. At that time, they met the emission limitation for particulate matter, and then were due to test again in September of 2020. At the September 2020 retest, they did not meet the particulate matter emission limitation, and on a retest in October, they again did not meet the emission limitation. So since receiving the results of the September 2020 compliance stack test, the facility is only operated to conduct stack testing or to troubleshoot operational issues combusting only propane. New Hampshire DES has taken 2 enforcement actions to bring the facility back into compliance with particulate matter emission limitation. On January 4th, 2021, DES issued a letter of deficiency, which requested Hebron-Bridgewater Refuse District to submit a compliance plan that detailed the steps they were planning to take to come into compliance with the particulate matter standard. On October 29th, 2021, DES and Hebron-Bridgewater entered into an administrative order by consent. This order specifies that the facility may only operate for testing purposes until compliance is demonstrated. Firing on propane is allowed for diagnostic testing. The facility is required to submit monthly progress reports, and the order also includes compliance testing provisions. Getting back to the permit, there are monitoring requirements in the permit for monitoring operating parameters, including the combustion temperature, the pH and flow rate of the scrubber recirculation fluid, and also the differential pressure across the scrubber. The permit requires scrubber maintenance and also requires continuous emissions monitoring for carbon monoxide and oxygen. Permit specifies that the operators need to be trained and also that the facility maintain a waste management plan. The permit contains record keeping and reporting requirements. The facility is required to submit semi-annual permit deviation and monitoring reports, an annual emission report and fee, an annual compliance certification, and each report must include a certification of accuracy statement. Recent stack testing has shown that the facility is not in compliance with particulate matter emission limitation. The source is capable of complying with all other air pollution control requirements. The facility is working with its equipment manufacturer to identify and correct operational issues. And the facility has entered into an administrative order by consent to only operate for testing purposes until compliance with the particulate matter emission limitation is achieved. The close of the written comment period will be at 4 p.m. on December 15th, 2021. I believe that's next Wednesday, not next Thursday, but it is December 15th at 4 p.m. New Hampshire DES will then review all comments and make a decision to either issue or deny a proposed Title V operating permit within 30 working days. The applicant and the public may appeal the director's final decision to the New Hampshire Air Resources Council within 30 days. If the director's final decision is to issue a proposed Title V permit, EPA has 45 days to review the proposed permit. After EPA's 45-day review period, any interested party has 60 days to file a citizen's petition with EPA. And we've included contact information for Karen Craver in case anyone has questions regarding environmental health.
All right. Thank you very much, Sheila. This time, prior to accepting public testimony, we'll provide an opportunity if anyone has questions, clarifying questions on the presentation that Sheila just gave. And so I'll turn it over to Barbara to open it up for questions relative to the presentation.
We have now enabled the GoToWebinar question function, as you can see on the screen. If you would like to ask a clarifying question, all you have to do is type your name into the question box and hit send. And we will call on people in the order that the questions were received. When we call on you, we ask that you give us your name and the town you are from, and if you represent anybody. We will unmute you so you will be able to speak. So at this point, is there anybody that has any clarifying questions on the presentation?
Anyone here in the room first?
On slide number 11, could you just give us the units, the acronym for the units? My name is John Untitled.
Okay.
So can we go back to slide number 11?
We did. Right, so for instance, for carbon monoxide, it's 40 ppm dV. And that's, the unit definition is there on the right-hand column, so it's parts per million dry volume.
And are those the same as you would find in the appropriate section of the Clean Air Act that you referenced? Trying to understand why this facility even requires a Title V permit.
Right, these are the emission limits currently listed in subpart 4F. And subpart 4F does require the facility to obtain a Title V permit.
Can you briefly explain why? The levels that you showed in another slide here, and quickly, sorry, they're so far below
Right, yep.
what appears in a Title V. I'm a little bit baffled why we're even here on Title V application.
Right, I think that's,
They're not numbered on the page, it's on page 5 of the bottom.
I think
You have modeling
going the
thresholds,
other way, Shelley.
major source thresholds.
Yep.
Tell me when.
Yep, keep going. One more. Right, I don't know if you
I think I can,
answer
yeah, so
that one.
certain EPA regulations, in particular, these that come out of certain section of the Clean Air Act, 111D and 129. There's new source performance standards, and in this case, emission guidelines. For some of those standards, for certain source categories, EPA requires a Title V permit, regardless of whether or not the emissions reach major source thresholds.
Right. Based on,
That's EPA's determination that they want those facilities to have a Title V permit.
not based on throughput, based on emissions.
It's based on if they are in that category, they are required to obtain a Title V. So in this case, any, so is this an other
Yeah,
solid waste incinerator unit, which is a certain type of incinerator of a certain size anywhere in the country is required to obtain a Title V permit. It doesn't matter what their emissions are. They don't have to trip the major source threshold.
It does matter that they are a waste incinerator, is that the category we're dealing with?
It's, I think the category is other solid waste incineration units, yes. So it's a very specific definition, but it is municipal solid waste of a certain size.
And how about of a certain class? We have different types of solid waste in New Hampshire rules.
And Sheila, step in if you I'd say anything wrong, but it's municipal solid waste as defined in the federal category of all other solid waste incinerators. So it doesn't depend on, I think if you're trying to like the waste type 1, waste type 2.
Doesn't depend on that.
No,
Because I believe the application said that this unit was going to be burning waste type 1, but looking into that, I mean, there are different descriptions of what waste type 1 is.
and our incinerator, New Hampshire's incinerator regulations and incinerator application forms require them to put that New Hampshire category on there. But it just happens that the waste that this facility burns, which is what most people would think of as municipal solid waste, coming from local businesses and residents, is of the type that's covered by that category. I recognize the New Hampshire classifications of type 0, 1, 2, 3 are awkward. And we're looking at trying to clean those up.
That the terms correctly, I'm with the Hebron-Bridgewater refuse system. Type 1, 2, and 3, and our designation is also to burn per hour, so, in terms of 300 pounds per hour to up to 750. This is the clarification.
Yeah, the capacity of the unit is considered in, what category of incinerator and what regulations apply. But in this case, it's municipal solid waste, and the size is below some ton per day capacity,
It's 35 tons per day.
put you in this category of other solid waste incinerators, which EPA says all of those units that meet those characteristics throughout the country are required to obtain a Title V permit.
Thank you for that thorough answer. Still made a little bit baffled by facility that's burning in pounds per hour, having to deal with the Clean Air Act. Why the state of New Hampshire can't figure out a way to manage this on its own.
We could not, we couldn't make it a less stringent requirement, and saying, oh, don't worry about it, you're small, you don't need a Title V permit, would be less stringent than the feds, so we're just matching what is required.
Can I ask another question on another subject?
If it's relative to the presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
You described the wet fume scrubber. That's a new term to me. Could you just briefly describe what a wet fume scrubber does and how it operates?
Sure. The exhaust gases are exiting, and a wet fume scrubber sprays water down to remove contaminants such like acid gases or metals. And the scrubber water is continuously adjusted for pH. So if it's becoming acidic, sodium hydroxide is added to keep it neutral or slightly basic. So it's designed to dissolve acid gases. And then there's also a packing media that increases the surface, the air water contact time, so there's better absorption of pollutants into the water stream.
So is there any discharge, or is this a closed loop system through a quench tank?
It's closed loop. They don't have a water discharge from this facility. They do have an evaporator, and I don't believe they have a water discharge permit for this.
So is the evaporator part of the air pollution control system? Is it part of this wet fume scrubber? It's all one unit, or is that a separate?
It's a separate. It's a separate.
And you have air emissions from that evaporator?
We have, we did consider that under our rules. Wastewater evaporators that aren't evaporating volatile organic compounds are exempt from our Env-A 1400 rule. And this facility, we looked at it and we determined that VOCs are not in the water stream, in that scrubber water stream.
Do you mind if I just want to make a point that people are online and they type in their name, so I just want to let them know that we will get to you after we're done with the in-person people.
I'd be happy to take a break, but I'd be interested in what you have to say.
First thing is that before the waste is put into the incinerator, we have pulled out the batteries, plastics. We don't burn plastics and so on. So effectively, all we're burning is basically household waste in terms of kitchen waste and things of that nature. So we batch burn that. As it goes through the quencher lowers the temperature from about 1450 to 1600 degrees. And that is turned on and cooled down to 165 degrees. During that process, there's a pH probe that turns around and injects sodium hydroxide in there to keep everything in neutral. So, and eventually it gets into so much water that comes through the system, it's recycled and stored in a blowdown tank. After the blowdown tank gets up to a full capacity, or while we're running, water is slowly taken from that, which has suspended materials in it, and we boil off the water. And that goes through a filter so that all we're doing, and the temperature of the material going in there, so is lower than the melting temperature, say, of lead, cadmium, or anything else that in minute amounts in there. So effectively, so nothing goes into groundwater. The problem that we have with the particulate, which we thought we've been very close on, everything else is substantially lower than most of those, but that's the worst case scenario. It's lower than that, I believe, quite a bit so. When you put in and we take those, when they turn around and do the stack testing, in 2010 and 2015, we actually took those and had them sample at a lab. So there's trace elements that are not detectable, but the only thing in there is sodium and chlorides. They combine together in humidity that's in the stack, and that's causing us to emit the particulate it's 90% of the particulate going up the stack, that is slightly over the limit at this present time is salt. So the problem we're running into is we found that just recently that the temperature cooling system that was designed should be going out at about 85 degrees. We're running at almost 120 degrees at the stack. So we're in the process of looking into improving the efficiency of the heat exchange, which is right now. So it is a closed loop system. We don't inject water and we try to minimize that stack. And we're down to about 26 days a year of operation.
I'd be happy to suspend if you would.
Yeah,
like
well,
to go to-
do you mind if we let the people on, because somebody's been putting her name in a few times, I think she's anxious. But I'm going to tell you the order of the people that we're going to call on, and then we'll start calling on people. The first person will be Rebecca McKenzie. Second will be Jacqueline Elliott. And third will be Katie LaJoy. So at this point, we're going to unmute Rebecca McKenzie.
So
Hello, can you hear me?
Excuse me.
Say some feedback.
I'd like
I
to
don't-
remind you, at this point, we're taking questions, clarifying questions relative to the presentation. This is not the opportunity for testimony. That will be after we finish with questions. So go ahead. Do you have a question, Ms. McKenzie?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for having me. And I have a few questions, but I'm glad to do, if somebody else needs to ask a question, I can go back to the line again. But as I understand the presentation, it sounds like the incinerator is actually in a probation mode right now because it isn't meeting the current particulate matter emission standards. Is that right?
I wouldn't call it a probation period, but they have not met the particulate matter emission limitation in the last 2 stack tests.
I think
Okay.
what's meaning is that they, according to the administrative order,
We can,
yeah.
they're under an order not to operate except for testing until they can prove that they can pass the particular standard. Once that is proved that they can get back into compliance, then they could incinerate waste.
Okay. As somebody who has asthma, that's a very important issue for me. And I'm confused because it seems like if they can't meet the particulate matter standard, how can they be meeting other volatile organic compound standards like dioxins and compounds like that? It seems as though I may be confused, but I think it might be small particulate matter. testing?
Well, I mean, they have conducted testing for each parameter, and they've demonstrated compliance with all of them except for particulate matter. So there can be an exceedance of one pollutant and the other ones are in compliance. I'm not sure if that
Okay.
answers your question.
Well, it was concerned that if particulate matter isn't being met, what other, I don't understand how others can be met. But I guess my other concern is, as I was looking at the incinerator today online, it looked like it was very close to Newfound Lake. And I know that some friends of mine have camps, and there are a number of children's camps on that lake. I was just concerned about the exposure of that on the children who are there in the summertime, but maybe the incinerator isn't operating during that time. I also saw in the summary that the incinerator burns green waste. Is that what is green waste organics? Is that what that means?
I think that means more kitchen waste. I don't think it's green waste like grass. It's household waste, things from your kitchen, food waste.
I'm hoping that New Hampshire comes around to look at composting rather than burning organics. I think that's a really important issue. Also,
At this point, I'd ask you to just to stick with questions relative to the presentation. If you have testimony or comments that you want us to hear, we'll take those during the testimony part of the presentation. Thank you.
okay. And how many times incinerator has been inspected over its lifetime?
Typically inspected every 2 years. I don't know how many times that is, but it's certainly between 5 and 10 times it's probably been inspected, I would estimate.
And so every 2 years there's a test?
Every 2 years we go out and inspect the facility. The stack testing that's done is either right now they're on a stack testing schedule of once per year for particulate matter and once every 3 years for the other pollutants.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your expertise.
Thank you for your questions.
Okay, next up is going to be Jacqueline Elliott, and on deck is Katie LaJoy. So Jacqueline Elliott, we will now unmute you.
Please state your name and your and where you're from.
Retired to the state of Maine. I guess I have a little confusion. I'm sorry, I had a little trouble logging on, so I missed some part of the presentation in the beginning. I'm a little unclear as to why the state is not necessarily seeing this operation as requiring a Title V operating permit, but the EPA does. I would think if EPA requires that, the state would see it that way too, but there might be something I'm missing. And some things have been discussed this evening that really raised some flags for me. The fact that this facility is currently still not in compliance with particulate matter regulations. Particulate matter is of importance because that is the vehicle by which much of the hazardous pollution is distributed. Why or where are we in the process of this Title V permit that the facility still can't meet the regulated requirements? Why are we still in the process of looking at a Title V permit? Where are we in that process?
All right, and I think that the initial question or comment regarding Title V and, why doesn't the state think this? Maybe I wasn't clear. EPA regulations require these types of facilities to have a Title V permit. New Hampshire, without any judgment, we're just adopting that and requiring this facility to get a Title V permit. So it's not that we don't believe that they need one or anything like that. And relative to why are we proceeding with processing this application? So there's the permitting aspect and making sure that the permit is up to date. We're processing a renewal application. There's also the compliance aspect. As Sheila noted, we've been testing and monitoring this facility. They've failed particulate tests. Our compliance bureau is working with them and have developed an order requiring them to make some changes, keep us abreast of changes, and not incinerate any waste until such time as they demonstrate compliance with that requirement. So in both of those things, the permitting and the return to compliance plan can happen at the same time.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah.
So how long would this current status of the process go on? In other words, how long would this application remain viable? And how long would the department allow this facility to try to meet the standards before they say ixnay on the permit?
That would be like kind of predicting, okay, if this happens, what are we going to do? There's too many variables to like tell anybody now what's going to happen if they fail their next particulate test. All I can say is that the Compliance Bureau uses New Hampshire's Compliance Assurance Response Policy as a guideline for whether and what types of actions they take with facilities that are not in compliance. Right now, where we are, again, we've entered into an order requiring actions and returning to compliance with the particulate standard.
When did the department request or rule that the facility could no longer burn until it could meet the requirements? Because this facility has been operating under that obnoxious category of a permit shield for a number of years now. So my assumption is that until the department said, you're not meeting the standard, therefore you can't incinerate until you get there, there was a period of time that the facility was in fact operating and not meeting these standards. Is that correct?
There's the permit shield aspect of it. Again, we could maybe separate that out. So for any facility, their permit requires monitoring, record keeping in order to demonstrate compliance.
Well, if I may just interrupt, my question more specifically is, when was the facility, what could be the department required the facility to stop incinerating because they were not meeting the particulate matter regulation?
I think, Shirley, but somewhere in the review summary is the date of the order, which is
Right.
October of this year. that's the date that the enforceable order was signed. I don't know a specific date, but I do know that prior to the signing of that order, they were not combusting waste, knowing that this was a compliance issue.
Okay, if I'm
So I do
understanding
not
this
know a
correctly,
specific date.
if I'm understanding correctly, the facility was burning waste until October?
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
Shelley, can you move forward in this presentation, please?
The audio is not great, so maybe I'm not hearing clearly.
Yeah, stop right there. Okay, so, right, they had a window here from September of 2019 to September of 2020. So in September of 2019, they met the PM emission limitation. So they basically had 1 year where they were in compliance. So they operated during that time frame. In September of 2020, they did
Fail.
stack testing, burning municipal solid waste, and they were over the PM emission limit. And then in September or October of 2020, they again tested and they were over the limit. So since I believe since they've gotten the results of the September 2020 compliance stack test, they operated in October so they could redo their test, but they haven't operated other than that.
So it's
Burning municipal waste. They have burned propane, trying to figure out what their operational problems are. But they haven't burned municipal solid waste since getting the results of the September 2020 compliance stack test. It's that
So-
second bullet there. Can you read that, or does that?
Yes, I can see that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
So, okay, if that is so, this facility has not been processing the waste from the regional refuse district in that time period, correct?
Not in the incinerator. They're sending it off site to, I mean, they're still generating trash in town, but it's not
Obviously.
going to the incinerator.
Can you say where the trash is going?
I did not know.
I don't believe that's the subject of tonight's hearing. We're talking about the permit. If you have questions relative to their compliance status, you can contact us here and speak to one of the compliance officers. So I'm going to ask you to stick to questions relative to the permit, to the proposed permit. Okay. We'd be happy to address any questions that you have if you want to call the department to talk about the compliance status.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Elliott is done, then next Katie LaJoy. So we're going to unmute you, Ms. LaJoy.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Are you able, you can hear me? I don't have questions. I have comments.
Are they relative to the presentation or are they testimony?
It's testimony.
Okay, we are, at this point, we're accepting questions relative to the presentation, and then we'll move to testimony. So if you could
Okay.
just hold for a minute. And Barbara, do we have anyone else that has any questions?
Does anybody else have any other clarifying questions? I see somebody in the room does, but if anybody else online wants to type in their name to ask any clarifying questions, feel free while we address the person in the room.
So Ms. LaJoy, we'll come back to you when we start accepting testimony.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question on the process here. We saw the public notice in early August, and at that time I did go through the file comprehensively, but that was quite a while ago. And this is on me, but I was not aware that there had been a administrative order by consent. It sort of changes the picture here quite a bit. And I wonder what precipitated DES and the permittee seeking an administrative order by consent. Was that initiated by DES or was that a request by the permittee?
I think that's probably a question better asked with the Compliance Bureau, and I probably actually reading that order, because they usually start out with a laundry list of facts and here's situation and here's what our response is.
Typically, when there are procedures for enforcement, and again, these would be better addressed, but we would start with some type of notice or letter of deficiency, and then we would resolve. One manner of resolving those is through an AOC, an administrative order of consent, which is an agreement between the two parties to bring the party back, to bring them into compliance. So but that typically follows our discovery and so on. But it's an agreement that both parties work to.
So the agency is seeking to bring a permittee into compliance.
Exactly.
All right. We have units on here again. I think this actually was the one I was thinking of. That's grams per dry standard.
Actually, it's grains, which
What
is,
is a grain?
it's, there's 7,000 grains in 1 pound.
Only in air math will you find it.
Well, that's pretty hard to wrap your mind around. It would be helpful for the public in general, because I know DES likes to work on public outreach and public education to help us better understand these units. Dealing with sometimes very small numbers, but
Yep.
you're dealing with them over 30 or 40 years. You have cumulative impacts. I think we need help with visualizing. That's a comment. I want to go back to a question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I noticed in the application that there was a list for 1 million cubic feet of propane per year. I don't know if that's the maximum amount could be used. That seemed like an enormous amount of propane to be, worth, 7.5 million gallons. Price of propane today would be absolutely unaffordable. So how much propane are we actually thinking about in this facility per year?
I don't think,
Ballpark.
I don't have that number.
Million was on the application. Cubic feet, which is huge for a town of 1,000 people roughly.
Go ahead.
That's the BTU release when you turn on burn and you actually ignite it. How much energy release there is in a pound of propane or a gallon of oil. Propane is far cleaner. So the end result is we have 7 1,000 gallon tanks, and we would most likely burn about 500 gallons a day, burn 2,000 pounds of waste. It is not, the diesel truck that hauls off the waste that we're presently burning will put far more pollutants in the air than this propane.
Thank you.
That's about 10,000 gallons a year.
No, we don't burn anywhere near that, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 tops.
Thank you. I was confused by that figure in the application. I have one more, I think, here. Having to do with the, this question has to do with the basis for establishing a testing frequency. So you test once every 3 years. If you don't meet the standard, you switch to once every 12 months. And I'm wondering what the basis is for establishing that testing frequency and whether one snapshot basically on a given day or however long the period is for testing sequence, maybe 2 days, 3 days, I don't know. But how representative is that? How about the data from that? What is the basis for establishing the frequency of testing?
The frequency for the testing is established in the rule.
Okay.
And I would say they start with annual testing, and then if they show compliance for 3 years, then they reduce to once every 3 years. So it's, initially it's every year, and then they have the opportunity to reduce it to once every 3 years if they
That's in the
demonstrate
rules.
compliance.
That's 1 day in 1 year.
Yes,
When you're maybe grabbing 5 or 6 samples, I don't know how you do that.
it's pretty,
It's laid out in the rules, but still, does DES really feel confident that that is a representative sort of a set of data for what might be emitted over the course of an entire year? Don't you have fluctuations based on operating parameters and based on the actual fuel source?
well, we think it's pretty representative. We do have people on site that are observing the stack tests. It's not a grab test. There's, sample ports and exhaust gases continually extracted from the stack.
The stack test protocol has to be approved by DES prior to stack test occurring. There's a protocol, and so that's part of our determination as to whether it's appropriate or not.
I'm really looking for the basis. How would you
Yeah,
defend?
and that would be in the rule, and we did. I think that would be a separate issue at this point in time.
Okay.
Yes. If you have a brief comment.
In addition to all this, into the stack testing that occurs, there are sample ports that are monitored 24/7 on a continuous emissions monitoring system. And that data is then streamed into a database. So even if we're running and something exceeds it, it automatically locks out the feed rate and shuts us down automatically. So the computer just runs it. So in a given year, a biomass plant might put out 200 tons of carbon monoxide. We run most of the time almost in zero. So if any of those parameters were exceeded, we get alarms. If it exceeds too far, it will shut itself down.
Thank you.
One last question.
Yes.
Has to do with, one, we have to mention this at every hearing now, which is whether or not anyone is considering PFAS emissions, airborne PFAS emissions from these facilities, whether that has been considered or not. Let's take that one first. Is that a consideration part of the agency?
Only to the extent that it's required pursuant to the statutes and the regulations that are in place at this point. There are very few PFAS compounds, but there are some that are on the Env-A 1400 list.
Okay, now,
So those would be evaluated.
as
Yeah,
far as,
excuse me, please. I really, go ahead.
as far as dioxin goes, same sort of question. There are some rules about dioxin emissions. And it does occur to me that if you're using the that wet fume system, that you are cooling flue gases off dramatically from, I think, we heard 14 to 1600 degrees down something around 200 or a little less maybe. That's a pretty big drop. And I've read anyway that as you cool off flue gases, that dioxin generation may increase. Is that something that the agency is aware of or has looked at?
They have been doing stack testing for dioxin, so we have actual test data.
Okay, and that is tested after it's been through the scrubber? Or
Correct.
through the pollution control system?
Correct.
And they're meeting those standards such as they are?
Yes.
I think I can rest there.
Thank you. Appreciate your questions. All right. So at this point, I believe we've taken care of all clarifying questions relative to our presentation, and we'll move into the testimony phase. So Barbara, do we have, I know we have Ms. LaJoy lined up for testimony.
Let me just to reiterate, if you want to give testimony, we ask that you type your name into the question box, and we will call on people in the order that they are received. I also want to make a point that if anybody who is online, attending this hearing online, that wishes to receive copies of the final decision via regular mail, we are asking that you type your mailing address into the question box so that we have that on file, and then we'd be able to send you hard copies. If you are okay with just receiving everything via email, we have the email that you registered with, but if you would like a different email to be used, again, type that email address into the question box for us so that we have that on record.
So, Barbara, thank you. And what we'll do now at this point is to take testimony. We will start with those present here in the room, and then we'll take testimony from those whom, as Barbara just mentioned, if you type your name in, we'll start there. So we'll start with those in the room. And Mr. Tuttle, I believe you had testimony.
Would you like to go first? No. I don't have prepared testimony. I came here today to learn. As I said at the outset, I really am baffled by this entire application and by this process. Not too surprised, having been around the Department of Environmental Services for a number of years. I do think that this process has sort of pointed out the fact that the rules maybe need to be, I think, strengthened somewhat, and standards need to be revisited. My question about the frequency of testing, I really would like to get to the bottom of that. I don't feel reassured that testing annually or every 3 years really is giving you a clear picture of what actually is being emitted by these facilities, because you do not know what is coming in the front door. And that has a tremendous impact on what may be coming out. You can't simply assume that you've got a uniform fuel source as you might with certain fuels that are coming in tanker trucks from an industry that is already regulated at the point of production. Unfortunately, in this business, and this is no fault of Bridgewater's, this is universal. We're talking about getting rid of things. And these things involve liability and they involve cost. So, you know, it's an industry has developed that assists us as a society in shedding that or moving that liability down the road. And incinerators, I think, are particularly problematic this way. Because essentially you are using the atmosphere as a dump. And we're essentially diluting risk. It's carried off on the wind. It does tend to impact, I think, poorer communities less able to defend themselves, as we learned in Sullivan County, not just politically lacking the clout, maybe in a difficult economic position where, you know, bringing in a multi-million-dollar facility, not the case of Bridgewater, you know, is perhaps very attractive at the local level to solve some immediate problems. But the long-term environmental impacts, air quality and water quality impacts, as we've seen with PFAS and air deposition, which we really should have known about decades ago, not just PFAS compounds, but, you know, persistent toxic substances in general, which are routinely emitted under our current standards in this state and under the Clean Air Act as well. So I think we've got real problems with the entire program. I really would like to see New Hampshire take a lead on this. They already are on PFAS, certainly on the water side, but we have not, I think, really come up to speed yet on the air emission side and the deposition. And I think even with a very small facility like Bridgewater, that it's very likely that you are getting PFAS emissions off a combustion unit burning municipal solid waste, if indeed it is limited to municipal solid waste. But we don't have the means right now to really assure ourselves that what we're calling MSW class 1 through 4 or whatever it is entirely free of hazardous toxics and other toxic substances, however defined. We're going going to start dealing with this now in New Hampshire with filter materials and water systems who are removing PFAS compounds, for example, from people's home water systems. Also at the municipal level and private water systems. So there's a lot to think about here. I'm a little bit surprised to find ourselves sitting in this room at a hearing over a facility that's burning materials at the rate of pounds per hour. It's just extraordinary. And it's a publicly owned facility, which frankly, in my opinion, is the model we should be using. I think privatization has brought a lot of problems to this state and to the nation generally when we basically handed off the management of these materials to for-profit corporations who have grown enormously powerful, dwarfing the ability of the state to regulate them. And the federal government, to the extent they do regulate them, pretty slow to move. The kind of change I'm looking for, I don't think is going to happen readily at the federal level. I don't think we can wait for them. I urge New Hampshire to continue to take a leadership role and to really change the paradigm here. And I had some opinions that I was trying to leave aside as I was going through questions. And I think maybe I'll just put any of those that come back to me through my notes into some sort of written comments. But I really do think just looking at the presentation, when you've got basically you're failing to meet a standard year after year on a facility that's been under a permit shield for getting on to a decade. I mean, this is extraordinary. I think that this might be a time for the DES to see, how far they're able to go in terms of revoking a permit or denying a permit application. I understand the politics and the legal threats. I don't like seeing a small town getting clobbered by a large state agency. But you've got to ask, the system this size, whether the economics make sense in terms of what we're doing here. That kind of investment, if it were put towards serious toxics reduction in the waste stream and to volume reduction, I think would be, in the long run, far preferable. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Okay. For
Barbara?
people attending online,
Barbara?
we have,
Barbara?
oh, sorry.
Anyone else in the room have testimony?
We're very concerned about the air quality.
Yeah, excuse me. I just want to clarify, this is not an opportunity to rebut other testimony. This is, if you have testimony relative to the permit. So,
The only thing I can say is that the separation at the very beginning of the cycle, that as we turn around and put in the waste material, is all inspected. And so we have pulled out plastics. Those get recycled and shipped out. We turn around and pull out, there's no steel, there's no batteries. We turn around and so we're talking about basically, there are no oils, we don't burn oil.
Again, I'm going to ask you not to rebut the other testimony. I'm going to ask you if you have testimony relative to the operation of to this permit. I'd appreciate that.
That's fine. I'll discuss.
You're free to discuss this after, but that's we have to run this according to certain procedures. So, all right, Barbara, go ahead.
Okay, we have first on the list will be Katie LaJoy. Then up on deck will be Rebecca McKenzie, and after her will be Jacqueline Elliott. So at this point, we are going to unmute Ms. LaJoy.
So, Ms. LaJoy, go ahead, please, again, identify yourself and the town that you're from, and if you represent any organization.
Okay, my name is Katie LaJoy. I am hearing an echo, are you?
No.
Okay. My name is Katie LaJoy. I'm from Charlestown. I'm a registered nurse, and I work with Working on Waste, and we're a citizens initiative that promotes safe alternatives to incineration. I'm pleased DES is holding this hearing because all Title V permit applications should have a hearing. Facilities requiring Title V permits have statewide impacts because they perpetuate a system that focuses on landfills and incinerators instead of programs that prioritize conservation, recycling, and composting. Those of us who oppose waste incineration work to convince DES to help owners, incinerator owners, close their facilities and adopt zero waste options that maximize conservation and recycling. I'll submit written comments by December 15th, but for now I will briefly comment on why DES should deny this permit. The permit is unusual due to the size of the throughput, 9 tons per day, and the nature of the incinerated material. And according to the permit application review summary, HBRRD pulls out glass and metals, plastic, wood, and other contaminants. And so what they're burning is mostly organic components, what's called green waste. Why not compost the 9 tons per day of green waste and eliminate the incinerator air pollution? In the past, DES has told citizens that the department's permit decision will only consider compliance with air standards. This approach is problematic. DES cannot be absolved from ensuring compliance with the policy and purpose of RSA 125C, New Hampshire's air pollution control law, and which states that it's hereby declared to be the public policy of the state of New Hampshire and the purpose of this chapter to achieve and maintain a reasonable degree of purity of the air resources of the state so as to promote the public health, welfare, and safety, prevent injury or detriment to human, plant, and animal life, physical property, and other resources, foster the comfort and convenience of the people, promote the economic and social development of the state, and facilitate the enjoyment of the natural attractions of the state. The Bridgewater incinerator does not achieve these goals, and that is why DES should deny the permit. Air emission standards for the incinerator are not health-based due to toxicity and cumulative impacts. In addition, we've talked a bit about the non-compliance with particulate emissions, and presumably this is due to salts being introduced into the exhaust system by the scrubber. Again, why subject the public to this unnecessary and unacceptable pollution? I urge DES to work with the town of Bridgewater on a closure plan for the incinerator that includes a transition to decentralized and diversified composting programs. DES has published proposed revisions to the requirements for composting, and written comments are due December 20th, and a public hearing is held on December 13th. And you can go to www.desnh.gov, News and Media Rulemaking Notice, Amendments Composting Facility Requirements. I encourage Bridgewater, the town of Bridgewater, to learn more about composting and work to end its reliance on a polluting incinerator. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Testimony?
So next, we will be calling on Rebecca McKenzie, and on deck will be Jacqueline Elliott. So Ms. McKenzie, we will be unmuting you.
Thank you so much.
Again, please identify yourself and the town you're from and any organization that you represent.
Sure. My name's Rebecca McKenzie. I live in Claremont, New Hampshire. I am a member of the Working on Waste group, and we are hoping to really have some thoughtful things to share with the Air Resource Council because you are so responsible for the health and welfare of so many of us in our beautiful state. So my first part of the testimony is I just want to contrast. I lived in New York State. I actually grew up here in New Hampshire, but I lived in New York State for 30 years. And in New York, your sister organization is called the Department of Environmental Conservation. And I just want to have just a brief moment to contrast that with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, because I think it's an important point. And the point I want to make is that I think it's so important there's a very big difference between serving businesses and protecting the environment and conserving it. And so for me, the agency is a service for the businesses that develop an industry that can unfortunately poison residents. And I just, as the Air Resources Council, we also have to stop looking at our air as a resource. It is not a resource, it's life. It's our ability to breathe and stay healthy. If we don't have healthy air, we don't live. So it's not a resource to be used up. It's a gift to be cherished and taken care of. My second point is I too am very concerned about the frequency of testing and don't see that as a representative example of what may be coming through incinerator stacks. And so I appreciate the gentleman's who spoke to the fact that the computer analyzes this data, but I just am very concerned about how that frequency of testing plays a part in the perhaps problematic emissions that may be able to poison those that are in the path of the wind that carries those emissions. The third point I wanted to testify to is that as a very critical part of the Department of Environmental Services is the Air Resource Department. And your influence in helping to craft and look at the general policies of how we deal with our waste is so critical. So I would like to empower you to be part of the conversation in New Hampshire that creates a circular economy for dealing with waste and looking at the potential in our state to create a zero waste policy that would help us to better manage it's going to take a lot of different influences to be able to create a zero waste or a circular economy. And so the power of the Air Resources Council could be a wonderful addition to helping that conversation and policy change develop. The last point I want to make is that Bridgewater
Mrs. McKenzie, yes, you have 5 minutes, so if you could move towards wrapping up, we'd appreciate it.
This is my
Thank you.
my last point. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay. The last point is that Bridgewater right now has been using an alternative way of dealing with their waste. And I don't know what that way is. I don't think we talked much about that, but there has been an alternative that has been established because of the probationary period that it's on with the emissions problem. And so I wonder if that also might be considered as maybe they don't need an incinerator. That's my last point. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony.
Okay, next we have Jacqueline Elliott. Ms. Elliott, we will be unmuting you. You can speak.
Again, please state your name and the town and any organization you represent.
Jacqueline Elliott in Waterboro, Maine. I work with Working on Waste, and I work with a citizens group here in Maine called Don't Waste Maine. Thank you for this public hearing. And I would just echo the points that have been raised already in testimony this evening. I will be submitting some written comments, but as I've listened to the presentation this evening, as I noted previously, what I've been hearing has raised some serious flags in my mind. Issues around regulating temperatures in the facility, the problem with meeting particulate regulations, the issue of testing frequency, all these matters, I think can be summed up with saying that we can just see the inadvisability of utilizing a waste incinerator to accomplish the goal here, which is to manage the waste that is generated by this district. New Hampshire has had the good sense of establishing a waste management study group. There are currently, as has been noted, rules changes with the solid waste management department relative to removing barriers to compost operations for communities. The refuse district here, this Hebron-Bridgewater refuse district, you're already doing a good part of what's important about managing waste well. You're reclaiming some resources. The place where you're just really falling down is you're taking the organic portion of your waste stream and trying to incinerate it, which is really the last thing you want to incinerate. It's a valuable resource that could be managed in a way that would bring benefits to your communities. A usable product that is value added, that could build your community relationships, that would help sequester carbon emissions and return good things to the soil that's depleted. And the scale of this operation to me seems like an opportunity for the department to just really step up and start moving things forward in a way that makes a lot more sense than currently what is being done. Remove those organics, minimize the amount of waste generated, remove the valuable resources on the front end and reclaim them and return the value to them. And you're having a real problem here trying to meet the requirements of this permit by dealing with the pollution created on the back end of dealing with this waste. And that you could do away with that. You don't have to do that. You have a choice. You could do better. You could take a different approach that would eliminate the need to try to take care of the back end pollution, which, if we'll all be honest here, that pollution is not being taken care of. Okay? The form of it's changed. It ends up in filters that then need to be disposed. It gets put into the air. It gets deposited on our lands. It fouls our water. And most importantly, it harms our bodies, particularly the bodies of our children. This permit should not be renewed. The department would really have a hard time justifying saying, yes, continue on with what you're doing here. This is a good thing. I'm old. I don't mince words anymore. We all know this is a bad idea. We all know that it's not regulated in any way that truly addresses the impacts to the environment and to the public health. And I think you have an amazing opportunity here as those entrusted with the environmental health and public health of New Hampshire to do something better. And I would urge you to use this opportunity with this permit to deny it and to work with the communities represented with this permit to develop those better policies and practices in managing their discards. I thank you for the opportunity to present this to you this evening. Thank you for your time. I know you have difficult work, but as citizens, we depend on you to help us move to a future that is handled better than the past and the present. So please help us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elliott. Rebecca McKenzie has asked if she could speak again.
Briefly.
Briefly. So we will unmute you, Ms. McKenzie.
I'm going to ask you to limit yourself to about 2 or 3 minutes here.
Yeah, I just have something quick to say. I neglected to mention, because I'm a new member of this, but I'm a member of the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. And I just wanted to bring before you that we are seriously mobilizing the healthcare workers in New Hampshire to address healthcare concerns. And this facility is an example of a kind of important part of the work of this organization to try to address. So I just wanted to bring that before you, that our environment impacts our health, and we need to be so much more aware of. This organization is composed of doctors, nurses, social workers, all kinds of public health officials, epidemiologists, and we are going to start talking out more about the concerns that we have in New Hampshire about our health. So just know that that's another piece of the population that is becoming more vocal about health in New Hampshire. That's the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. And I encourage any healthcare workers to look that up and join it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. McKenzie. At this point, there's nobody else that's online that's requested to speak.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. That concludes our public testimony. I'm asking that we put up the contact information for our last speaker, put up the contact information for Karen Craver. So if you can see that, Karen is our key environmental health program contact. So I would urge you to reach out to Karen at 603-271-6803 or her email that's published there on the screen. So thank you for your comments. With that, I will conclude the public testimony portion of our hearing this evening. I'd like to offer a couple of quick notes here. As stated earlier, the deadline for public comment will be at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, December 15th, 2021, next Wednesday. And just to reiterate the process, once the public comment period is closed, DES has 30 days to review all the comments and issue a final decision. All those who registered for tonight's hearing and those who submitted written comments will be provided with a copy of the final decision via email. It will also be available on the DES website. As Barbara mentioned, you can provide us with your mailing address if you so want on the GoToWebinar. So that concludes tonight's hearing. I thank all of the participants. We appreciate your time and your investment in making comments. And I could now close this hearing. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't intend. Good job. This is not an opportunity for debate.